Let me welcome all of you to Chat with Matt. My goal with Chat with Matt is to find people, interesting people who have something to say. And tonight, this afternoon rather, we have Mike Lorelli. Mike is an old friend of mine. All my friends are old, but we won't get into that. Mike is my private equity expert. He's presented at our Westport chapter times and talked about how to find jobs in private equity. Today we're going to be talking about finding board seats, which I think is a topic that everyone has great interest in. We have roughly 90 people registered for this meeting, so I know it's an important topic. Mike and I are going to dialogue, and I would ask all of you to keep your microphones off and to use the chat box if you have questions. My wife Peggy is co-hosting with me this afternoon, and she'll be moderating or monitoring the chat box, and we'll be answering your questions. We have an hour blocked out, basically 45 minutes for Mike and I to have a conversation about board seats, and then the last 15 minutes we'll try to answer all your questions. So Mike, my general practice is for people to kind of introduce themselves, and because I've been introduced many times and people always butcher it. So I'm going to let you go ahead and give us a quick of who you are and what you do and how you wave your magic wand and make things happen.
So the 20-second elevator speech is I was blessed to have been a PepsiCo president twice. I've run 5 private equity portfolio companies since, and I've been on 11 boards, 3 public, the rest private. I love coaching and teaching on helping people land board engagements.
Well, terrific. I think everyone has a goal of being on a board, and I think the urban legend outweighs what the reality is. You've had quite a few board seats. Maybe you can just tell us before we start our presentation what it's like being on a board. Is it fine meals and evenings out with glasses of wine? What's the reality?
Yeah, so reality is all over the place. But I would say the 2 reasons for doing it, number one, it doesn't hurt at some point in your life to start blending in some non-W-2 income, meaning income from other sources. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. I'm on 4 boards presently. Generally, I've been on 3 or 4, and that's always been while I've had a day job, in quotes. So that's kind of been a blessing to be able to have that as an addition. But I will say, at some point, I am going to give up this day job stuff at some point, but I'm never going to give up the board work, because the emotional gratification of getting out of my sandbox, going to another city, sitting in a board meeting, being part of management decisions, being asked questions, people genuinely interested in my point, is so gratifying. When I come back, my cobwebs are completely cleared. I feel like a totally new person. So that's kind of my snapshot on boards.
Cool. One of the things that are within our group, which is becoming a little bit more popular, is people doing part-time CFO work. And that's kind of the same reaction. You know, if you have just one job, you kind of get boring and stale. If you have several companies you're kind of coaching through even your CFO role, it gives you you find out you have a lot to offer.
Yeah, and if it's more than one board role, even better, Matt, I would think, right? Following your model?
Yeah, people, the room gets quiet and people turn to you and ask you a question. It's pretty gratifying. I'm on the board, the Connecticut board of the Association for Corporate Growth, and you know, they do a lot of email marketing and things like that. And they have membership issues, and I have a lot to bring to the party. And people actually listen to me. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
When should people really get started on board work? What's your take?
Yeah. So, Matt, that actually is the perfect leading question coming into this. Now, just give me a little education here first. What is the age, not average age necessarily, but what are the age buckets of the people on this call tonight?
Sure. I think most people are at least in their 40s. Many are in their 50s,
Good.
60s. And I think the
Yep.
people who
Yep.
are much older are the ones who are primarily looking for board seats. And I know from reading some of the materials you sent me that that might be a little late.
Well, I would say that when you hit the big 4-0, you need to buckle down and start thinking seriously about getting yourself on one, if not two, good boards. Now, the reason why I have a very crisp answer to that question is because a good recruiter is always going to present a slate of 4 or 5 candidates, right? And if you have zero board experience, odds are several of the other candidates do have board experience.
Oh.
So if you're sitting back and you're reading that spec and feeling very good that you're spot on the spec, that is not good enough. Your mission is not to be spot on the spec. Your mission is to be the tallest duck in that pond. And if the other candidates have board experience and you have none, I would say you're starting that race in last place. Not a good thing. By the time you're in your 40s, buckle down, get serious. Now, for those on the call in their 50s and even 60s, don't sweat too much about what I just said. Better late than never.
Sure. I think most people have some board experience. They may not think of it that way, but they've been on not-for-profit boards. When I was in my 30s, I was treasurer for my congregation, and it was a board of 20 people. So I was doing the busman's holiday thing. I was waving my magic wand as a effective CFO of a not-for-profit. And I think people should, I think in the materials you sent me, that even not-for-profit stuff does count.
Yeah, and it counts for a lot, just like you're doing your ACG work, and I'm on the board of the Connecticut chapter, of NACD. So in a sense, we're both doing the same thing. But nonprofits, and I appreciate that you brought this out, do count. They do matter. Very rarely would you ever read a CEO's bio without it saying somewhere in there that he's on a nonprofit. That could be United Way. That could be Leukemia Society of America. It doesn't matter. Nonprofits absolutely do count.
Well, good. That's good to know. And I think people shouldn't discount that kind of information when they're looking at doing professional, let's say professional board work. So we've kind of covered why people are doing this. It's not really just about the money, I suppose, although money does help. But when you're on not-for-profit boards, you're just donating your time. So why don't you delineate the types of boards?
Yeah. So I want to go back and make a little light of the comment you just made about income. Because if you can cover your burn rate at home with board fees, that is not the worst thing in life that can happen to you. Now, sure. I'm not going to sit here and spend a lot of time talking to your audience because they're very financially astute. The differences between profit, nonprofit, advisory boards, private equity boards, venture capital boards, etc. But I would like to dimensionalize the relative size of the buckets. Okay?
Yes.
Because many people I meet who think about boards, immediately say to themselves, I want to get on the board of American Express, or Microsoft, or Ford, or Boeing, or one of those Fortune companies. There was a remarkable article in the Wall Street Journal. I remember the day vividly, November 17th of 2017. And the article basically said, as a result of all of the M&A in the last 4 decades, there are now only 3,671 public companies left in the U.S. Now, this was a Wall Street Journal op-ed piece. 3,671 Fortune-size companies left in the U.S. Now, when most people read that article, they actually thought that it was a typo. How could the Wall Street Journal, of all people, not have a proofreader to check this stuff? Well, guess what? The number was the right number, 3,671. I actually still have the original copy because at some point when I find the time, I want to call the guy who wrote it and say, man, I wished that you, thank you for that great editorial. I wished you would have gone on to say in that same 4-decade period, the private equity equation has exploded to the point where there are 16,800 private equity portfolio companies, 85% of which, by the way, have boards. So think of the relative size of those two buckets, 3,671, 16,800. Given that there are 24 hours in a day, if your interest is getting on boards, why not fish where the fish are, which is the private equity piece? Now, I've ignored in this arithmetic venture capital boards, and I hope at the right point in this conversation tonight, Matt, we can talk about VC boards, which is a completely different animal. I don't say that in a negative sense, but there are stark contrasts versus private equity.
Sure. But this number is private equity portfolio companies or private equity firms?
Private equity portfolio companies.
Okay.
And if you wanted the other number, that would be about 3,000.
Okay, so there's 3,000. The private equity firms are becoming sort of conglomerates in a sense.
Yeah.
And
in many ways, they are. And the 2 articles that you pushed out, which I hope most of our listeners had a chance to read, the 2 articles that Matt pushed out, one is specifically on private equity boards. The other one is on VC boards, and we can get into that time permitting.
Sure. So the private equity folks are, as I've determined, they're only interested in one thing, and that's getting their money back. So they really are very focused on who they put on these boards, I assume.
Yeah, but it's interesting in a way because a standard, in quotes, private equity board composition would be 3 people from the PE firm, so they can control the decisions that are being made, the CEO of the company, that's the 4th, and then 2 outside directors, 2, maybe 3, more cases than not 2. The reason for those very precise numbers, 2 or 3, is you obviously have to have outside directors sitting on comp committee, right, and audit. Otherwise, you have no governance. So if you're serious about governance and you want to save cost and reduce board fees as much as you can, the answer comes down to the CEO, 3 from the PE firm, 2 outside directors, 2 or 3 outside directors, very, very small in size. That is about as opposite GE in its worst days, where they had 13 outside directors. I mean, you got to rent Yankee Stadium to hold the board meeting. God knows how they did that. They since undid, all of that outside director stuff.
So what's the profile of a private equity board director? I hope it's not somebody in their 20s, because this is the wrong audience,
I hope it's not what?
People in their 20s.
Oh, no. But I actually may offend your audience with this next comment. I really hope I don't. But the stereotype private equity person, is someone that grew up through the finance ranks. And then after MBA, did a couple of years at Goldman or some other firm. So they look for people with other skills, other styles, and it can be anything. Now, I will quickly add that people with any audit experience are very much in demand because there's a supply and demand issue going on with audit right now. A lot of people are audit qualified, but because the task could be so onerous in a public company that literally might be 13 physical audit committee meetings a year, plus a whole spree of conference calls. So if anybody on this call has got audit skills in particular, I would say that's something you want to highlight on your LinkedIn profile, your bio, your resume, et cetera.
Managing the audit relationship is a key factor, I guess, is what you're saying.
It is.
Great.
Yeah, but
That helps
the
us.
question you asked, which I never got around to answering,
Sure.
is what's the typical skill set? So, because many people think you need to have experience in that category. So today, I am on 4 boards. Okay, one is a software company. When I joined this company, I promise you, I knew nothing about software. The second is an AI company, artificial intelligence. I promise you, I knew nothing about AI when I joined that board. The third is a restaurant turnaround company. Okay, admittedly, my Pizza Hut and Rita's days, I do know something about the restaurant side. The fourth is a cannabis company. Please don't tell my mother I said that.
I won't. We won't mention it. So again, the demographics, what are they looking for? I assume I have always found this private equity people are very open to senior level people.
Yeah, very open because, yeah, for all those kinds of reasons, I would say audit is in demand, international is in demand, cyber is in demand, but not as much as it might have been 2 years ago when everybody had the rude awakening and realized that they were all cyber dumb and better catch up, pretty quickly. I would say those would be 4 dimensions that are very much in demand. Actually, the one that's very near to my heart is women. And it's a fact that 10 years ago, only 10 years ago, 12% of outside directors were women. That number today is 20%. That is an embarrassing number. One of the boards, which I don't want to name that I'm on right now, has made a statement that the next time we need an outside director or a VP, we're going to give the recruiter the spec to find us a diversity candidate. We don't say woman, we say diversity. So the point I'm making is that there is an incredible sensitivity to the fact that women are so underrepresented in boards, and everybody is racing to catch up. Those of us on the call from California know that the state has mandated any public company in California have a minimum of 2 female outside directors by the end of 2022.
Oh, well, that doesn't give them much time. Within our group, I don't know if you're aware of it, but within our group, only about 11% of our members are women. And it's not by design. I mean, we welcome everybody, but not all that many women go into accounting to start with. So we have what we have. So why don't we spring over to credentials? Many of our members are certified public accountants, and they've kept their credentials current. Some of them are CMAs. Some of them are, certified treasury professionals. So they're kind of in their credentials. What are the recommended credentials? What organizations do you need to belong to be a credible board candidate?
Yeah, so I would say all of the acronyms, initials, whatever, that you mentioned, Matt, are very important, very helpful. They add really important financial dimensions to the board composition. I would say beyond that, typically when there is a board search, and they basically have that format, right? The CEO, the 3 people from the PE firm, 2 outside directors, so you have some governance on audit and comp committees in particular. I would say beyond that, think about, as you're studying up on the company where you might interview, review the bios of the board members, review the bios of the VPs, review the LinkedIn profiles of those same two groups of people, and try to look for holes where you think you might uniquely fill. Now, are we able to pull up slides here, Matt, or no?
We can, but why don't we stick with what we're doing and keep on.
Okay.
We're doing
Okay, good. So, okay, good. So let me just give a real world example.
Mike, this is where you were going to mention the NACD.
Well, no, I was going to mention here, when you're talking with them, when you're in the interview situation, think about what the skill set is for the existing boards, with a keen eye out to look for voids that they might have and where you could fill that void. Now, the best way that I could talk through this is to give a real world example of me. So when I first met Falconhead, which later evolved into being an operating partner and a CEO and a bunch of other stuff, but I won't go into that. When I first met them, they had just bought Rita's Italian Ices. So I read the bios, I read the LinkedIn profiles of the existing board members and of the VPs in the company. Now, what was most notable to me was this was their first acquisition in the restaurant space. So you would form a conclusion, preliminary conclusion, that they didn't have a lot of restaurant experience in the company. Number two, in one of the documents I had read, it was actually the announcement document and their deal thesis. They mentioned that they had hopes for expanding the trademark outside the U.S. So in that interview setting, so I'm smart enough to realize that they were probably interviewing 3 or 4 candidates that day. We were meeting all of the operating partners. How was Mike Lorelli going to distinguish himself? So one of the points I made when I got asked, sometimes very bluntly by an operating partner, Mike, I got it. I saw your LinkedIn. I saw your resume. You'd be a great board member. I got all that, but I'm interviewing 4 people and I'm running behind right now on time. Just get to the point and tell me why I should pick you. My answer to that question was, I said, well, I can bring both QSR experience, quick service restaurant, and international, because you saw from my resume that I built Pizza Hut's international division back when PepsiCo owned the restaurants in the 90s, which at the point in time was KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. So I could be a good sounding board to the company as they're thinking about building the footprint. Now, when you think about what Mike just said, a little convoluted, I apologize. Mike just gave us 3 bullet points, so to speak, on his PowerPoint slide. He knows QSR, we don't. He knows international, we don't. He said he could be a good sounding board, which means anytime that the team is thinking about how to enter the Middle East, how to enter South America, how to enter wherever, every time he opens his mouth, he's probably going to give them a $250,000 McKinsey study for free. That's not so bad.
Right.
So you got to do your research. You got to think about what skills they already have, what blanks they may have in their collective skill set, and where you uniquely might fit.
Sure. So again, maybe we can go back to the credentialing, the NACD and so forth. What are the right organizations to join?
Yeah.
Do they have credentialing programs?
Yeah. So perfect question, Matt. So thank you. I would say of the clients from my private practice, and I do help people get on boards in my private practice. And just as an FYI, not a political plug, the website for that is fasterlandings.com. Think pilot, fasterlandings.com. But when I hear back from clients about their landing a board role, if they haven't volunteered the one thing they thought they did exceptionally well that singled them out from the other clients, I get 3 most popular answers. One is exactly the point, Matt, that you are bringing out. I'm glad you're bringing this out on this call, is the notion of getting credentialed. Now, NACD by far has the lion's share of the market, so to speak, for doing this kind of work. Terrific organization. I do a lot of work for them. I write articles. I've given webinars, et cetera. The notion of getting credentialed distinguishes you because it says you've got a personal standard where you want to be on top of your governance game and you want to stay current. So I would say that is number one. Number two on the list of answers I hear back from clients is taking the time, and this requires some discipline, to reach out to the 500 Matt Buds that you know who are likely to hear about board seats and tell them. Because each of those Matt Buds that you know probably knows 1,500 people like you. What are the odds that your name is going to be top of his lips if he gets a phone call from a company saying we need a board member? Do you know somebody with an X, a Y, and a Z? You got to let people know. And I'd be willing to bet of the 90 people on this call, the 90 people on this call probably know 1,500 Matt Buds or Mike Lorellis. You got to let them know you're interested in boards. If you single somebody out and tell them that once, they just never forget it. It could be 5 years later, they get a phone call about a board opening, and they say, you know, Matt Budd just called me a couple of days ago. Man, he'd be perfect for this. In fact, I look good if I nominate somebody of his caliber. So I would say that is the second most powerful answer I get from clients. The third one I get, and I delved into this a couple of minutes ago, is the notion of doing the skills map. Map out the existing board, the existing VPs, look for gaps in their skill set and where you could uniquely fit. I had a client who got an interview to go out and meet with a Dutch company on a Saturday. He obviously flew out on Friday, and he literally handed out a piece of paper in each of his 7 one-on-one interviews where he mapped out such a skill set. He was an IT guy. And he showed that they had a gaping hole in their cybersecurity experience. And that, given that he was an IT guy, he was particularly skilled in that. They offered him the job on the spot. He called me tickled pink, actually laughing from the SAS lounge.
Yeah, well, if you do it right, it works. So I think what you're recommending is you tell everybody.
Well, not everybody necessarily, but
Right.
people who you know who are likely to hear about board openings. So when I do a public seminar, and people say, hey, Mike, how many people should I call? I say probably 40. And they say, well, I don't know 40. And I say, well, hold on a second. Before you come to that conclusion, put on that list every boss you've ever had, everybody you know who's on a board, every recruiter who's ever called you, all of the audit firms you've worked with, your personal accountant, high potential people that you hired that have grown up to become, gods or goddesses of various companies. All of those kinds of people belong on that list. When you think about an expanded list that way, it shouldn't be hard for any of the 90 of us on this call to come up with 40, if not 50, of those kinds of names.
Yeah, you have to talk to a lot of people. Or as they say, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince.
Either way.
So you mentioned LinkedIn a little bit. Maybe you want to expand on what needs to be on your LinkedIn profile. I remember at our meeting, you typed a few words into Google and got your LinkedIn profile. It was the magic trick.
So I will give you Mike Lorelli's LinkedIn seminar in 5 minutes. And I confess that I personally am a LinkedIn junkie in the positive use of that word. I joined back 22, 23 years ago whenever it was that they started. I will tell you 80% of the algorithm, which they don't publish, it's their secret sauce, comes down to getting two things right. So let's just talk about those two things.
Please.
One is the headline, which gives you 120 available characters. Use every one of those. You get no brownie points for going under. Number two, punctuate it properly. You want to use those spike bars, which depending on your keyboard could be in different places. I'm looking at my keyboard here. It's above the enter key in the uppercase column, but that's where my spike bar is. Most people, by mistake, use forward slashes or bullets between keywords. Now that's okay, but that's not maximum. Maximum is if you use that spike bar. The spike bar tells the algorithm what's to the left of it is a different thought than what's to the right of it. They're two completely different expressions. Then I tell people, don't bore the world telling me what you're doing now or what your last job was, because nobody really cares. Populate those 120 characters first with the likely keywords that a recruiter might use if he wanted to find somebody with your skill set. It could be things like accounting, it could be audit, it could be compliance, all the other things that you do. Populate it first with those kinds of keywords, and then if you still have room within the 120 characters, then by all means put in your day job or your last day job. I say this jokingly because the only person on the planet who's going to arbitrarily looking for somebody with your skill set, go in to LinkedIn and just start typing in the keyword section, VP of audit and compliance at XYZ Chemical. The only person who's likely to go in and type in something like that off the top of their head is probably your wife or your mother. All right. Nobody else is going to do that. Populate it first with keywords that represent the things that you excel at, that they might be using in a query. So that's the first part of my 80% rule, getting the headline right, the right punctuation, putting keywords that a recruiter would use. Then the second part of the 80% of the algorithm is the about section. Now, the about section gives you 2,000 available characters. Use all 2,000. And the best mechanical approach that I've found with all of my clients is to start with a good summary block, a good elevator speech, 3 or 4 sentences, 1 paragraph, short elevator speech that tells people 98% of what they ever wanted to know about you. And then under each of those, put in 3 or 4 what I call campaign platforms, which are things that separate you from 2,000 other women, from 2,000 other guys. All right. And then under each of those chapter headings, give me the evidence, give me the proof. Now, we can't do this online while we're doing the webinar here, Matt, but if everybody looks at my own, you'll see it's exactly that format. Start with a good, short, tight elevator speech, then give me 3 or 4 chapter headings, what separates you from 2,000 other people, and then under each of those chapter headings, prove it. That's what you want to do with your LinkedIn profile, Matt. I hope that answered the question.
That is a very close synchronization with good advertising. The first part is, your 90-second announcement is what I refer to as an advertising promise. And then in the resume, if you're using a resume or your LinkedIn profile, you have to prove each point. And I think that's the direction you're sending people.
Yeah. So, so for your audience, I would say, take a look at mine, Mike Lorelli. It's pretty easy. There's only 4 walking around. Take a look at my own. You'll see what Matt just exactly described. Feel free to feel free to plagiarize it. I would also suggest that everybody on this call connect with me on LinkedIn. As Matt said in his email, I always respond to professional audiences that I speak in front of. And the only reason why I'm saying connect with me is part of the LinkedIn algorithm, their secret sauce, is how many people you are connected to. I am what's affectionately known in their system as a super connector with 8,000 something connections. So simply being connected to me elevates you in the rankings as somebody is doing a query. So it's
very kind of you to take LinkedIn. Not everybody does, you know.
So MK Lorelli.
Segue to questions that you're going to, obvious questions are going to be asked. You know, in the world of job search, the classic one is, why did you leave your last job? If you don't have a really pithy 10-second answer to that, you're going to get bogged down. And you shouldn't be caught off guard. So what are some questions that you're going to be asked if you actually get to a place where you're going to be interviewed for a board position?
So, boy, that list is almost endless, but questions like, what do you think your contribution, would be? What boards would you best serve on, in your opinion? Now, more important than my just giving you my own personal answer to that right here would be the concept of giving soundbite answers. When you're in a board interview session, right, time is valuable. They want sound bites. I've been in situations where I've been interviewing candidates. They open their mouth. They can't stop talking. I have no idea if they're handing me a chapter of a book or a complete novel, but in either case, I'm bored to tears. So as an example here, if someone were to say, hey, Mike, so this is pretty interesting. What board do you think we should think about what committee rather, do you think we should be thinking about putting you on? So I'm going to give you Mike Lorelli's answer, which probably will not work for 89 of the 90 people on this call, but I'm going to give it to you as an example of a soundbite answer. My answer to that question as to what committee would you best be served on, Mike Lorelli says 3 things, and I tend to speak like a PowerPoint slide. I give a headline, I give 2 or 3 bullets, and then I shut up. A headline, 2 or 3 bullets, and I shut up. So, Mike, tell me what committee you think you would be best served on. And I say, I've served on a couple of audit committees, and I understand all that stuff, but by no means would I be qualified to be the audit chair. On the other hand, I actually have chaired 3 compensation committees. I would consider that a sweet spot, but having said both things, I understand service to the Queen. I'm happy to serve on whatever board you'd like, whatever committee you'd like to deploy me on.
Nice. So what are the tough questions? I see you have some on your list. Considered but not selected, I think was the most intriguing. Yeah. Because people are trying to get you to say something stupid, right?
Yeah. So, I have always in interview settings, and I'm not just talking about boards, I'm talking about assistant product manager at Clairol. I've always enjoyed turning the table around at the right moment if you think you could get away with it and the person has a little bit of a sense of humor, and putting a little bit, of the onus, on them, so, I always enjoy toward the end of an interview when it gets a little lighter and both of there's only another 6 or 7 minutes left, I say something, like, what haven't you told me? So that a year from now, I don't pick up the phone and say, why didn't you tell me about that? There's nothing wrong with turning the table around a little bit. And it shows that, you're speaking to the other person, as a peer, not as a subordinate, which is a good, healthy thing to exercise your muscles around. One of my other favorite questions, Matt, is, so Sally, the CEO, if a recruiter says to me toward the end of the interview, Mike, do you have any questions to me? Yeah, I say, let's just talk about Sally, the CEO, for a second. What's the best way I could make Sally comfortable? So if she's stuck thinking about a decision she's got to make by Monday, what's the best way I could make Sally comfortable so that she picks up the phone, calls me on my cell, as a confidant, and asks my opinion? What's the best way that I can make Sally comfortable? Now, I got to tell you, if you ever said something like that to a recruiter and he had 5 or 6 other candidates, man, you would rocket to the top of his selection recommendation list in a nanosecond, because a question like that, which is a Machiavellian question, you're asking it not because you want to hear the answer. You just want to ask it for the sake of asking it. A question like that suggests pretty strongly that your role on a board is, in fact, service to the queen. The best way that you can be of assistance to the male or female chairman, CEO of that company, that's your real role. So I would say those kinds of questions, Matt, are very, very powerful.
Yeah, and it goes along with something that John Locke, the author of Jobs Over 100,000, would say, and he says, your first job as a new executive is to fit in.
Yeah.
Not to
And
shake
fit
things up.
does.
The people who think they're going to shake things up are the people who shouldn't really get selected. You have to work with all these people, and you have to find a way to get them to trust you, which is, I think, the direction you're going with that comment.
Matt, Matt, it's about 20 of, do you want to kind of wrap this so I can read some questions, or what do you want to do, Mike?
We're going to kind of wrap in another couple of minutes.
Okay, and then I'll go.
We'll turn over to questions. I liked your slide about preparation for your interview. Peggy and I have had this discussion about, she always over prepares. So that's a relative term. And the reality is you can't really be over prepared for anything.
Now, so this is interesting. Let me give a 2-part answer, Matt, to that thought that you had. For a public company, it's pretty easy, right? You're going to read the annual report, you're going to read the proxy, you're going to read the last Ks and Qs and everything else, and you can get most of what you ever wanted to know. However, most public companies still have on the investor relations tab on their website the playback from the last investor call. That is the richest source of information. But you're going to hear the CEO talk for 30 minutes. You're going to hear the CFO talk for 45 minutes. You're going to pick up all of the industry lingo. You're going to pick up how they talk about the competitors, what the major issues are. I mean, you're going to get more from listening to those, 65 minutes than you would poring over all of those publicly available documents. Now, I get people who say to me, Mike, okay, that's nice for a public company, but I'm going for an interview with XYZ, which is owned by so-and-so private equity firm, having difficulty getting data. And I say, no, it's amazing how much you could learn when you simply Google all the competitors. So I never accept that as an excuse, for a lack of good, serious prep. But I do tell people 2 or 3 days, not 2 or 3 hours. In fact, on a couple of occasions when I've interviewed for jobs, so now I'm moving off of the board topic a little bit. So if you'll accept this 60-minute diversion, in many occasions, I actually took a stab at trying to put their strategic plan on a single sheet of paper. And I would use that with the chairman, CEO, or whoever I was meeting with. And I'd say, I had so much fun studying about your company, thinking about today's. I had so much fun studying about your company. I actually took a stab at putting on a single sheet of paper what I thought your strategic plan was. Now, and then I play a little Columbo, like, make like you're the dumbest guy in the room. Now, I know this is probably 90% wrong, but would you mind if I share this with you? Because I'd be interested in where I got it right and where I missed the mark. Would that be okay if I shared this with you for 60 seconds? I got to tell you, I've used that in a couple of interview situations. The person is always blown away that you did the diligence, and that I'd be willing to bet any one of the 90 people on this call, their answer would probably be about 100% right. Not even close, but no cigar.
Yeah, I have a policy when I'm doing recruiting that I don't recommend my clients hire any reluctant brides. They either want this job or they don't want this job. If they want this job, they better show me, because I would rather the client hired somebody who really, really, really wants this job. They'll expend more energy when they're actually hired. So you demonstrated one last point before we move to questions, and that's about publishing articles. I have to tell you that Peggy's, my wife, has published lots of stuff on LinkedIn, and it has created business relationships for her. People read things that are of interest to them, and they connect with you on LinkedIn. It's really pretty amazing. So, but you are in your niche, and you've written some articles that we distributed. Why don't you tell us about your thinking on that?
Yeah. So let me first talk about articles, and then only because I brought it up earlier, I do want to talk about the difference between PE and VC boards. So if we have enough time for me to do both. On the first one, I would say if someone has asked you to write an article, I don't want to say insist. That sounds a little pushy, but I would say strongly suggest they put your postage stamp, is what I call it, somewhere in the bottom corner, which has got your name, rank, serial number, your picture, your contact information. So if a recruiter that does a lot of board work, or somebody else in the industry, is reading your article and really enjoying it, and say, wow, Peggy really is on the ball here, I want to call her. You want to make it pretty easy, for them to find Peggy. So I would say politely suggest, delicately suggest they include your postage stamp, which I refer to as name, rank, serial number, picture, contact information. I've made a lot of very valuable contacts by using that approach when I publish the various articles. Now, I do want to talk about the difference between VC and PE boards. So, and I did some research on this for NACD before I published those two pieces. And those are the two separate articles that Matt was nice enough to push out. First of all is that 85% of them have boards. Okay, so some of them, don't have strong enough feelings about governance, or a little too tight on the wallet to be able to pay for board members. Okay, that's okay. I'm not passing a judgment. But I would say the big difference between VC and PE boards is that the PE boards pay money. They want good, qualified people, right? So I got interviewed to go through an interview round with a hydrocolloid company in Atlanta. Now, I'd be willing to bet that there's probably one person on this call that's ever heard the word hydrocolloid. I never heard that word when I got called to go on this thing. But the fact of the matter is, they didn't want me for my chemical skills. I'm not a chemical geek. They wanted me because I had general management at PepsiCo. I understood, compensation. I understood management selection. I understood, planning, for succession and all those kinds of topics. That's the reason why they wanted Mike Lorelli. Now, candidly, though, if PepsiCo is going to look to add a director, they're going to call Spencer Stewart and they're going to say, give us someone who's either at another Fortune 25 as the CEO, meaning give us the CEO of Microsoft or Ford or Reebok, or Boeing or et cetera, or give us a retired military general, a marquee name, give us Colin Powell, whatever. They're probably not going to go after Mike Lorelli. So you need to position yourself for what your general management capabilities are,
Sure.
not just your finite bucket, but to get to compensation, and then I'll answer the question with that point. To get to compensation, PE boards pay money. They pay cash, they pay with options. It's a blend of both. VC boards, in my experience, the prep work I did for that article, almost never pay cash. They give you a boatload of options because everyone who gets dragged into that interview process thinks and hopes it's going to be the next Uber, the next Apple. They're going to make a gazillion dollars. The accepted statistic in the VC circles is that 1 in 39 get there. So you need to think about compensation, as you're devoting your time toward PE or VC boards.
Yeah, and if you do, it should, even if you don't earn any money from it, it better be something that is going to benefit you from an experience standpoint. If you're not going to earn any money from it, potentially, you want to pick something that's going to benefit you career-wise.
So, Matt, when I've given my advice to clients, and they go on that board anyway, that VC board,
Yeah.
I will tell you that almost 11 times out of 10, I get a phone call 9 months later saying, I'm not going to run for the next term. I realize I've just been sucked into doing free consulting.
Ah, okay. All right, that's good. Peggy, what's the first question?
Well, actually, it looks like I would say that the questions, you really answered them from my perspective. You talked about MCAD and other boards that you mentioned were helpful. There was a question about how to spread your word about experience. I think you really highlighted that on LinkedIn. Somebody asked if you were a member of a private directors association, and if not, should they look into it if you're not a member of a private directors association? Is that something that people should consider, Mike?
Yeah, so very good question, Peggy. The simplest way to put this is if they have a magazine, they're a real company. NACD, Private Director Association. If they have a magazine, they're a real company. If there's somebody smiling and dialing and calling you and promising they're going to get you on boards, and they're going to tell you their fee is $500 setup, $99 a month, I would say that's just an outright scam. I have been doing this coaching, helping people get on boards for 19 years. I have yet to hear from one single client that ever got a board seat through any of those smile and dial services.
Bruce Lynn and I met with some folks from Board Prospects, and it just
came
to,
now. Can I?
That's not how people get board seats. They don't publish them somewhere. Yeah.
Now let me modify my answer, because I met with the two guys whose names I can't remember, Mark and I can't remember the other guy's name, when they pretty much had started out, and so I met with them because I study this space. I would say if you were compelled to do one of those services, Board Prospects would be the one to do. I know them. I've done webinars for them, and they're trustworthy. But I would say the rest of the lot,
Yeah, I agree. They seem like really nice people. Bruce Lynn and I actually met with them several years ago when they were just starting out. And I certainly haven't heard any bad things about them. I just think posting boards are not really the tool. That's not how board seats are filled.
Well, those services, in quotes, that are out there tend to be populated with a lot of nonprofit boards. I'm not putting nonprofits down, please. It's not that's not my point. But they tend to be populated with nonprofits and a lot of cloaked, which to me is synonymous with fake.
So not to badmouth anybody, but so without naming names, have you had any really bad board experiences that you would want to share with us in general? Again, we don't want to get anybody in
No.
trouble or you in trouble.
Yeah, me personally, I guess I've been lucky, but I would encourage everybody to ask for an electronic copy of the D&O policy and have someone you know who understands D&O review it and tell you if they think it's sufficient for the kind of company that it is. That would be the biggest watch out, particularly if you're dealing with a startup where the founder, owner, entrepreneur who's trying to figure out how to make payroll next week. And he knows D&O is important. He doesn't have it yet. He's going to get around to it. He's going to get around to it next week. Well, next week becomes the first week of September, which becomes the first week of October. So he's sitting there with no D&O. So I would say if you're interviewing with a very small or VC company, read the D&O.
So you want to be insured because you can get hurt, right?
Well, I personally don't feel like, yes, Matt, you can get hurt. And I don't feel like writing a check for 10 years of my life-to-date savings over some frivolous lawsuit.
Yeah, people can sue you for any reason or no reason at all.
That's one of the things about America.
That's why we're not having meetings right now, because it isn't clear whether you can get sued for having a meeting and somebody gets sick.
You know,
Actually,
that's really interesting because NACD, in my chapter, we talked about this very topic. And the advice that we were given was that even if you ask people to sign a release that they understood the health risk for coming to this meeting, you still could get sued.
Right. So we can't afford to get sued. We can't even afford to hire a lawyer. If we got sued, that would break us. We're just a little not-for-profit. We're trying to do good for people. So
and you do that well.
doing Zoom, and as far as I know, you can't get COVID-19 from Zoom.
Somebody just asked if they wanted to know how to find a non-PE backed private board.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So there are a couple of groups out there. The most notable one is out of Chicago, Private Directors Association, where they specialize in non-PE boards.
Okay. So what have we left out, Mike? Peggy, did you have another question?
No, I think that's great. I would just say if there's anyone that does have a question, raise your hand or unmute your mic and speak up. Because
Yeah.
We have
So
a few.
So I would just say then that the two thoughts I'll leave the audience with is if you do go to fasterlandings.com, you'll pick up additional tips. Do look at my own LinkedIn profile for ideas that you might be able to adapt and use. And then do connect with me, www.linkedin.com/IN/Mike Lorelli, and I'll readily connect as a friend of Matt's and Peggy's.
Good. Anything else? What did we leave out? Anything?
You never do, Matt.
You did a great job. And Mike, it was great. Thank you. I thought you were very articulate. We understood you and heard you. After all that beginning, we were great. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you guys are both fun years fun people to work with. I still don't know the success to being married to the same person for 53 years, but maybe someday the two of you will teach me.
We're going to write a book about it. So I'm going to take over the screen. I know you've been enjoying watching Mike's smiling face. I want to thank all of you for joining us for Chat with Matt. This is one of our really successful events. We had, as I said, 90 people registered, and I'm going to try to find other very, what shall we say, well-spoken and well thought out speakers to entertain you and educate you on the important things in your career. So my belief system is that meetings should start and end on time. So I'm going to thank all of you for your participation, and I hope that you'll join us again for Chat with Matt. Mike, thank you so much. This was a great session. I enjoyed speaking with you, and looking forward to being of service to you. Take care. And
Always my pleasure to work with you, Matt.
There's a directory of the people attending this meeting, and you can pick up his email address, or you can connect with him on LinkedIn and send him an email. And I'm sure he'll be more than happy to get back to you. So thank you again, Mike, and everybody, join us on Chat with Matt next time. Take care.